The recording is live.
Good evening, everyone. I am indeed very pleased to introduce our second seminar for the fellowship training program of ICHRRF. And today's session, we will have our second fellow doing his first presentation. Our second fellow is Mr. Ripudaman Pachauri, and the faculty preceptor for today's seminar is an expert in the topic on which this presentation is being made. Our faculty preceptor for today's seminar is Dr. Shekhar Patel, and he will be guiding, or has been guiding actually, our Nanda Fellowship trainee, Mr. Ripudaman Pachauri. So I hand over the stage to Dr. Shekhar Patel and our fellow Ripudaman Pachauri. Dr. Patel, please.
Yeah, good evening, everybody. It's really a good opportunity to work with Mr. Ripudaman Pachauri. It's my privilege, and today's topic was very important, specifically from point of view of Indigenous people and their religious freedom. So I'll just give only one liner, and then I'll hand it over to Mr. Pachauri to talk more. The focus here was the context in which we talk about religious freedom for Indigenous people. And there has been, whomever you talk to, whether in academic area or activists, or if you go to lawyers, they all frame it in the perspective of how they understand a religious freedom, rather than how the indigenous people themselves understand. And you cannot even start a discussion or a dialogue without getting into a very huge hurdle right away, where the indigenous people feel that, there you go, they don't even understand what they're talking. So from that point of view, today, Mr. Pachauri will give his presentation, and he will frame the problem, and he will discuss the details what I'm talking about. So with that, I'll let Mr. Pachauri talk about it.
All right. Thank you, Shekharji. Thanks for giving me this opportunity. I'll start my presentation. The ancient and indigenous culture and their religious freedom. So, as the title suggests, that we will discover who the people, who the cultures we are talking about, what does indigenous people or culture means, and what about their religious freedom. Let's discuss. The agenda for this presentation is who are indigenous people, and what is the UN Declaration on Rights for the Indigenous People. Then we'll cover a case study of a tribe called Tuhana. This word K-T-U-N-A actually pronounced as Tuhana in their native language. And after that, we'll open the floor for the questions. Okay, so who are the indigenous people? They are the first people of the land, the First Nation. We call it with different names: Aboriginal peoples, Native peoples. Every country has people who are indigenous to that piece of land and uh, have been there since ages. They have their own languages, cultures, belief system, and laws. There are about 30 million indigenous people in the world. United States, United Nations declaratives give them right to manage their communities, and propagate their religion, language, culture, along with other rights. So what's the definition of indigenous people? Actually, it is undefined. The stress is on identify people based on their language, their culture, and their uh, self proclamation, and their land, the territories they belong to, and then work with them. So in United Nations Declaration, actually there is no specific declaration, definition of the indigenous people. There are about um, 37 million indigenous people around the world, and spread across 90 countries. They belong to more than 5,000 different communities and speak more than 4,000 different languages. And uh, approximately 70% of them are in Asian countries. About 30% of them are in United Western North America and South America. About 50%. There are some stats that we'll discuss later during the presentation. There are about 15% of the people, indigenous people, live in India also. Some top countries um, uh, where and their percentage of indigenous people in them. There are a lot of different kind of tribes. These tribes would like to address themselves as a native people rather than um, um, basically, if you know their name, they would like to address by their names, um, and not by the word native people. And if you do not know what tribe they belong to, you can call them indigenous people. um, I'll quickly go through the uh, UN Declaration on the rights of indigenous people. UN recognizes that there is a need to respect and promote the inherent rights of indigenous people. They are convinced that they should get more control and there should be demilitarization in their territories. And the states, the countries should comply with what the UN declaration is. But the UN declaration is not a binding agreement between the countries and the United Nations. There are a lot of points in this declaration. There are about 45 articles in it. I'll provide the link at the bottom of the presentation for the detailed reading and analysis. It's a pretty lengthy document. Time is short, so we cannot discuss it right now, but I do not want to do injustice, so I'll provide the link for that document. These two articles, Article 12 and Article 25, these are important. In a way, all the articles are important. They are important for the purpose of this presentation, especially because we are going to cover a case study where there is some reference to these two articles and why these are important. So they say that these people should have right to manifest and practice, develop and teach their spiritual and religious traditions, and state shall seek to enable the access and or departition of ceremonial objects and human remains that are in their possession. Um, Article 25 says that they should have right to maintain and strengthen their distinctive spiritual relationship with their traditionally owned lands and territories. I'll start with this case study, and it is about a tribe which is in the Canada and the British Columbia area, and this tribe is called Tuhana. And uh, it the this this uh, we are going to discuss about the project that was impacting or still impacting their territory. And this discussion started like about 20 years ago, when the minister of forest and started negotiating with the tribal people. And uh, they were advocating and trying to bring a company's project called Jumbo Glacier Ski Resort. And what they wanted to do is they wanted to have a ski resort in those mountains called Jumbo Valley. And the idea was to basically drop the skiers on the top of the mountain, and then they can get down on their skis. That was the project, and it was supposed to bring a lot of tourism in the valley. Um, the negotiations were, there were two parties along with the states. There were two parties involved from the tribal side. One was a Tuhana tribe, and another was called as Chef Swaps. Chef Swaps was the first one um, who agreed that okay, the company can build a ski resort in their territory. And but in 2012, what happened is every tribe have um, an elder person, or a knowledgeable person, you can say. They call it a knowledgeable person who has all the knowledge about the culture and know-how of the tribe, and they are the guides for the younger generation. So this elder person from the Tuhana tribe had a dream uh, uh, when the project was in the final stages. The discussion was in the final stages of approval, and the dream was, if the company uh, will build the ski resort here, then it will basically drive away the spirit of grizzly bears. And grizzly bears were supposed to be the spirit of grizzly bears were very important for them as far as their religious beliefs are concerned. Not only these beers provide them food, the clothing, and other things, but from the spiritual angle also, these beers were very important. Then what happened? So at the final stages, and the elder person of the tribe was very adamant if about what he's asking for, and what he's asking for is to just go away from that area and do not build a resort. So the case then went to the Supreme Court of Canada. And in 2017, um, so the concern was raised in 2000, I guess in 12, sometime in November 2012. And in 2017, the case went to the Supreme Court. And then Supreme Court heard both the parties, and they they gave the verdict that uh, see, um, the negotiations, the court gave the charter, the law gave them the right to practice their beliefs, but they do not give uh, rights to right um, uh, basically freedom of their beliefs, but not the law doesn't protect their instruments that they want to use to practice their beliefs. Like, for example, anything that is required to practice their rituals, any object, or here in this case, grizzly bear spirit was the object of the belief. They took the for their um, for their verdict, they mentioned that Section 2 of Charter um, doesn't allow them to give right of freedom on the objects they believe in, but they have all the right to practice their belief. And since the negotiations have already been done, everything is done, so they do not have any say, and this company can build the resort. They There is a section 35 in their um, charter. Just a second. I wish I could read the statement of section 35, but essentially um, um, that that law says that um, at any cost you should protect the rights of the indigenous people. So in the judge at the Supreme Court basically didn't even touch section 35 of their charter, and just gave the verdict based on section 2, which was not which was incomplete in a sense. So that was the story. And um, in at the end, basically, these Tuhana people lost the case after about 20 years, and at the takeaway of this presentation and this case study is that the belief is only a part of the complexity of lived religious experience, and the religious laws around the world are inspired by the Christian definition and lacks understanding of what religion means to the indigenous people. Indigenous people are not defined by UN and United States Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People is a non-binding agreement between the state and the indigenous people. So even though there is a declaration, but it usually um, it is up to the state how they want to handle it. That's all from our side. Thank you, and I thank Dr. Shekhar and Adityanji and Kar to help me and prepare this presentation. Um, there are some links that I have provided. These links belongs to the case study on the left hand side, and on the right hand side the first link is related to the declaration of the indigenous people on the rights of indigenous people. Then there's a website link of Tuhana Nation, and there is a page on their website that talks about this particular case. um, that's all. Thank you. Thank you.
So I just want to mention one thing, and basically, while Ripudamanji gave the whole gist of the case, a very strong argument that came out was the way the laws are framed. As he said, the instruments of indigenous people versus the belief system. So the way religion is defined in the context of current secular countries throughout the world, they are primarily based upon the Christian and Judo-Christian law, or the framework based upon those. So there are many areas that need improvement, wherein other faiths can be accommodated within that framework, so that when such cases go to the court, they are able to see the perspective of the indigenous people. And this has been a problem almost in every community where they are fighting, whether it is in South America or whether even in the United States, about land rights and many such issues that are coming right now.
So, any questions anybody has?
I had a question. I had a couple of questions actually. Pertaining to this case, where the tribal elder has a dream, and based on the dream, we have a 20-year case that goes on. Now, I mean, dreams, for instance, are not usually admissible as factual evidence according to the current legal system that we have uh, here in the United States, North America, or even in India. How so when it comes to religious rights, what are some of the proposals out there that can take into consideration religious sensibilities that are not already there in a book that everybody can see, read, and open and read? Like the Christian idea is that this is the book, this is our doctrine, this is our religion. But if you're talking about something like this, where it's a more fluid kind of religious experience and day to day or guidance from generation to generation, are there any proposals out there to take that kind of religious culture into consideration when talking about religious rights? That's my first question. Yeah.
Yeah. So first of all, the law doesn't dive down in the religious aspect of any community. Their main goal is to uh, uh, basically make sure that the basic human rights and their beliefs are not compromised. Okay, so like in this case also, they even do not, the UN even do not want to um, define who these people are. They are saying find them based on what they do, where they live, what how they speak, what and other aspects around them, and then serve them and protect them. Okay, protect their beliefs, what they believe in. See, there is a famous case in India about Sri Ram Janmabhoomi temple. That case was also being won by the community based on this factor only, the belief. So in that case also, um, the court says yes, this community believe that their ancestors also perform the rituals and worship in that part of the land, so that should belong to them. So did I answer your question?
Yeah, I guess partly.
Yeah, part. So
I,
what
I
was the other part? Sorry, what
no,
was
I
the?
mean, I just wanted to see if Shekhar ji or Ved ji
Yeah.
also address that.
So Kalji, actually, I did understand your question. We were talking about some belief system cannot be really characterized or measured like dream and things like that. But here, really, it is not the issue really about the belief system. These cases are from a perspective of religious freedom. These cases are getting highlighted because the larger community is getting into their affairs. They are occupying their land. They are trying to change their way of thinking. So it is not. It is really almost an assault on the indigenous people by the larger community, and and basically the time. If something happens 200 years ago, is a wrong that was done 200 years ago, it is simply brushed aside, and the current generation doesn't even want to recognize the wrong that was done in the past. But for these indigenous people, they still, the land belongs to them in their minds because their belief system is a little different. So the overall, to answer your question, the overall thing is that they are under threat from outsiders who are not respecting the issues. It doesn't matter what they do or how they believe, but it's the bigger issue that things land up in the court is that others are infringing on their rights.
Got it. So it's more of a
We have Professor Nanda, in whose name this fellowship has been started, and with his extensive legal scholarly experience, let's hear Professor Nanda give his views on the issues raised by Carl. Professor Nanda, kindly unmute yourself.
Thank you, Adityanji. The point simply is that each country has its own laws, and those laws are the ones that their legislature has adopted, and they simply, judges interpret those laws. So judges are not making the law, they are simply applying the law that the parliament, the assembly, whatever they are called in each country, has promulgated. And those laws are the ones that are based upon not really the beliefs that these people have or the relationship that they have with the land or with nature. And so that is where the disconnect comes. And so Shekharji is absolutely right. That's how it is happening. And the point simply is that at this stage, when we are talking about the law to be applied, then I think the issue simply is going to be that that legislature has got to appreciate, understand, and then protect and promote based upon their own beliefs if they consider it appropriate to have the laws reflect them. And the laws are not going to reflect them. That is where we are presently.
I just, in this connection, I just wanted, if I could just add to that. I remember reading about a case in the Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, the newly formed ex-Soviet republics. So their traditional religion is Tengriism, Tengri, and that's overlaid by Islam. But they still have a lot of that Tengriist culture, even though they're Muslims now for centuries. But there's also during the Soviet era and post-Soviet era, there's a community of people there in those stans who want to identify themselves as Tengriists. They kind of removing that overlay of Islam. But the state over there was not willing to recognize Tengriism as a religion, because they said we don't have a book. I mean, what is Tengriism? We don't even know what Tengriism is. We don't have a book. So their response finally was that, well, yeah, we don't have a book like a Quran or a Bible, but if you like, we can write one, and this that we can put together a book, and then you can recognize it. You think that is a practicable path to go down for indigenous traditions in different countries, including Canada, where they can maybe codify some of their beliefs, practices, and the things that they hold sacred, codify all of that in a book, and then have that recognized by courts all over the country? You think that's something that's
No, that wouldn't work. That wouldn't work. And the reason for that, I'm sorry. Oh, it's my echo. How do I stop the echo? It stopped. So the point I was making is that in many countries, the people in power, they can accept your traditions so far as personal laws are concerned. For example, about your marriage, divorce, inheritance, they might accept your own beliefs and your traditions, and if you have codified them, they might accept them. But the point is that what remains pertaining to natural resources, pertaining to land, pertaining to all that is considered as not in the personal domain, and that they are not going to accept. So at this stage, for example, when Canada to these First Nations or indigenous, quote unquote, indigenous people, what they have accepted and what the United States recently in a case in Oklahoma accepted, they accepted based upon the treaties And most of those treaties that all these settlers came in and occupied the lands, and they entered into some treaties and international agreements. And those international agreements also, promises made, promises never kept. Their treaties are broken. But occasionally, once in a while, they might accept a treaty. And in Oklahoma, just recently, 2 years ago, the Supreme Court of the United States accepted the treaty under which resources, under which the law that is going to be applied on those reservations is not the US law, but their own law. And that can be given by some countries, maybe under some special circumstances. In New Zealand, for Maoris at the present time, a great deal of effort is being made that some of those treaties, some of their own ancient laws be respected. Similarly, in Australia, but not much has happened yet. In Canada, they did accept in some instances. In US, this is the first case, but I think only pertaining to their own personal um, transactions, personal relations, those are being accepted at the present time.
I will make a comment, Mr. Clements, and the suggestion you gave that Indigenous people should codify and prepare a book about their main practices and things like that. You know, you are reinforcing a framework which is Semitic, Abrahamic, and you are interfering with the spiritual and philosophical and religious practices of ancient people by imposing a framework which arises from specific religious perspectives. So not only you are depriving them, but you are also reinforcing and forcing them to change according to Judeo-Christian law or Judeo-Christian canonical tradition. That's the only way for everyone else to affirm your spirituality. So that's the danger you're falling, pitfall, by trying to sort of overdo Christianity or Abrahamic religions.
Right.
And I think that is not right. We have to change the framework in which this discussion is held.
Right.
I would say that at least in this country, in United States, there are sovereign nations, and United States government has signed treaties with these sovereign nations. And although at some point in time they may have disregarded the treaties with these sovereign nations, with wider awareness amongst these sovereign nations, the native populations of United States, there is an effort on part of that segment of United States to reclaim their sovereignty. And they are trying to guard it zealously and bringing out cases not only to the administration, but also to the judicial system. Because on the reservations is the law of the sovereign nation that holds true. So situation is changing in United States, that treaties were done and they were not, adhered to. There's a moral, ethical, and, civilizational pressure on the US government. So although United Nations does not define, it's the law of that particular nation that has to be adhered to. And in case of United States, the sovereign treaties that were made. And there's an analogous situation elsewhere also. So rather than asking ancient people and indigenous people to change their way they practice their spirituality and religion, or the way they, uphold their rules and regulations, I don't think we need to sort of ask them to, wear a tie and a suit and become a native, Uncle Tom.
Right.
And our effort is that we rekindle the interest in their native tradition so that they can live their life the way they have been living.
Right. Right.
Patel?
No more comments.
I know Ankit is here, our fellow, Nanda fellow. He has been waiting patiently, but you are part of the group and you should participate in the discussion. And I was wondering if you had any thoughts on this particular topic.
Yeah, so I agree with this point that codifying this huge chunk of diversity to Abrahamic model is not the way forward. The trouble here is that the current legal framework is going to be the Abrahamic model because that's how its origin has been. So making a space out for indigenous culture in the Abrahamic legal framework is what the struggle is about. Now, if you want to have a legal framework which will be able to map the diversity of pagan cultures or indigenous tribes, I seriously think it will be a lot of deployment of resources from the state's side, provided they are even interested in doing this. So the question here arises whether they are interested in grabbing the voice of the indigenous culture first or not. And governments, as we see it, they are influenced based on political incentives given by the vote bundles. So the interest in the indigenous tribes for the state depends on how much political incentive these bundles can offer to the politics. So that's where the dilemma is. I mean, the diversity is so big in the indigenous cultures. If they can come together to become a political voice enough for them to hear to deploy these resources to map this diversity. And unless and until the diversity is mapped, there is no way the Abrahamic legal framework is going to embrace this diversity.
Right.
But one thing we might keep in mind that, for example, here water law, the law pertaining to landlord-tenant relations. At the present time, all the law pertaining to natural resources. There is not the Abrahamic tradition that tells them this is what at the present time the polity has decided in each country. And so the point simply would be that that polity and those laws, they are not the ones that are going to take into consideration the tribal culture and values and relations. I think that is where, at the present time, these tribes, for example, as Adityanji said, they are sovereign nations, and on reservations, their laws prevail. They have got their own court system. But again, there are all kind of constraints. The US law, in many instances, preempts their law. And so it will depend upon the legislature. And I think most of it has nothing to do with the Judeo Christian tradition. I think obviously those values are the ones that are there. But I think the laws today reflect what the polity in that country is going to be considering to be appropriate.
I may add another point of view. Yes, sometimes the electoral considerations trump everything. Sorry for using that word, but again, it is the level of awareness that determines how the treaties are honored and re-honored and reaffirmed. United States had distinct tradition of stealing the native lands, despite signing the treaties. And successive regimes or administrations at the federal level winked and let the land mafia, the local governments, the state governments violate the enshrined treaties with the reservations or the sovereign nations. And it was the Federal Department of Interior that was responsible for managing the reservations or relationship with them. Now, for the first time under the current administration, the Secretary of Interior is a person who is a Native American. And I think her name is Debbie Alexander or Debbie Hallam. I don't recall. Professor Nandaji might recall.
No, that's fine. Yeah.
But there's a change how the Department of Interior is now dealing with the payments to native reservations, to individual native persons who are the members of these sovereign nations, and how their land claims are being processed. So things have started moving in a different direction. So let's not underestimate the value of naming and shaming. In a civilized society, when a society claims to be civilized and simultaneously continues to violate the rights of indigenous people, in the civil society sector, it is the responsibility of civil society organizations to raise the moral conscience of the governments, whatever level they are, and name and shame, about their acts of omission and acts of commission. And that's happening in United States with a number of Native Americans, being very vocal and highlighting it, and hence the change. So sometimes indigenous people have to speak for themselves, and they have to develop their alliances with civil society organizations. The right example is ICHRRF. It's a civil society organization. Why we are discussing this? Because we care for these issues, and highlighting these kind of injustices, moral injustices, ethical injustices, religious and spiritual injustices, I think behooves civil society organizations that we lend our voice to the people who have been marginalized, who have been persecuted. And we should not actually just give it up that everything is under a Judeo-Christianic framework, so we cannot change the situation. That would be a nihilistic point of view. That would be a pessimistic point of view. Change always requires raising your voice, not necessarily in a violent manner, but even in peaceful, civilized manner, with a society that claims to be civilized. So I think pretty much for every indigenous community, the same model will work when you have to work within the system, utilize your allies in civil society, in international organizations, and highlight the issues and name and shame the governments that are not doing their duties and responsibilities.
And the sad setting is that here we have next to us reservations, and my law school works with them. We help them many a time when my colleagues go and assist them in trying to have them to put their wills together, to assist them in other areas. But at this stage, the plight of those people is such that economically, but for those casinos and having some money, they are in pretty sad shape. They are not at the present time even capable of sustaining themselves as a viable entity. We keep talking about, as we rightly say, sovereign nations. They don't have economic, they don't have political stability, they can't stand on their own. Today, if you tell them they are sovereigns, they can just do their own thing. They don't have the capacity, they don't have the capability, they don't have the economy. So I think at this stage, as Dityanji said, name and shame is wonderful. We need to stand with them. But there is a whole lot that has to be done in order to pull them on that ladder because they are still at the lowest rung. Adityanji, I've got to go to another program.
Yeah.
I've got to leave. But I just wanted to come by to give my regards to Shekharji, to both our fellows, to Mr. Clemens, and to Adityanji. So
Thank you.
my sadar namaskar to all. I want you to know that I just came and I was looking at myself. I still have the tie. I have taken my jacket off. We had 215 business people, political leaders in Canada together today. Canadian Hindu Chamber of Commerce was launched, and I was very honored and privileged to do that launching. But you'll be very pleased to know the Prime Minister, the Premier of Ontario, ministers from those ministers from almost all the provinces, and along with them, High Commissioner of Canada, Consul Generals, 215 people were there. And I think that is exemplary that they have started a Hindu Chamber of Commerce, Canadian Hindu Chamber of Commerce, because they have got, just like in the US, diaspora from all over the world. But here we do have that. And I think Hindus in Canada for 100 years have made their own mark. And the Canadian society thinks that they have done wonders. And so I was very pleased to see that all segments of society, the executive, the legislature, civil society organizations, all of them were there to greet and congratulate and to celebrate with Hindus the launching of this Canadian Hindu Chamber of Commerce. So I just wanted to give you that good news.
Very nice.
Professor Nanda, it's always pleasure to hear you and your, wisdom, which has been, a scholarly, perspective, that has been there for last several decades worth of, intensive research and all. And we are fortunate to have this fellowship, in your honor, and we are very fortunate that both our two fellows are benefiting for your depth and wisdom and scholarship in the area of human rights. So it's always a pleasure. You are welcome to drop in any seminar for our fellows at any point in time, whether you are, the faculty preceptor or not. It will be our honor as and when you join us.
Adityanji, it's my privilege because with you, with Shekharji, with Mr. Clemens, it's really a privilege to be with you because Shekharji has done world-class work. So have you. And with all the track record and experience of Mr. Clemens, it's my honor and privilege, and thank you very much. And I've got to say to all of you, Shubh Ratri, and I'll go to my 8 o'clock
Okay.
meeting. Namaskar.
Namaste.
Other namaskar.
Dr. Aditya, do we have time for another question?
Yes, we do have another time for another question because we have given 1.5 hours to this seminar. We have not even done 1 hour. So yes.
So I just want to add one perspective to religious freedom, specifically of ancient traditions. And when we talk about religious freedom, we generally tend to focus more on external pressure on these traditions. But most of the native traditions, the challenge has been internal, because more than half of their community is now converted, or in some cases 90% of them are already Christians. So to be able to make them understand, this minority within the tradition faces a very uphill battle, wherein because of the democratic framework of the countries in which they reside versus their ancestral or hierarchical or familial leadership that used to be, now it has become more democratic. So people who have already converted tend to not worry about the freedom of their own brothers and sisters who are following the ancient culture. So that is a very big challenge for natives. And in every court case that you see, you'll always find a group within the native community that supports the people who are actually trying to trample on their rights. So that is a big challenge, primarily for the communities.
There is another argument, Shekharji, and the argument is from the tribal people itself, and some of these people say, if we not get help from our own people, then why not to take the religion of the people who are helping us day and night? And definitely they diligently work day and night to provide them various things, so that they can convert them. So so that is one argument from them, like what you have given us, or how we would sustain ourselves if we'll not get it, and it's not a bad deal. So what do you say about it?
Yeah, as Nandaji pointed out, there are two aspects in all these communities. One is the individual personal law aspect, and then the second one is the wider community aspect. And I've seen in some communities where individuals might have gotten converted to Christianity or Islam or any other religion, they still would put priority towards their culture and their their ancient wisdom. So I'm not answering your question directly, but what I'm trying to say is, if there is an awareness within the community that religion is only a set of practices where you have a book or set of certain things versus a larger, what we Hindus would say, dharma. So in Hinduism, you could be a Satya Sai follower, or you could be within a sect, but overall you have a wider value system, cultural system. So that aspect is slowly being recognized by these tribes, and they are slowly turning towards their culture, or what you could call dharma, as their primary motivation to protect their rights. And calling religious freedom, again, it kind of boxes it down into a certain category. So you could talk about certain rights violation, which don't fall under human rights, not they fall under religious freedom, but there is again a gap there where things can be fine-tuned and further support can be provided in that space.
Mr. Clemens, you had another question.
Yeah, and Thank you. Yeah, my question is kind of related partly to what Shekhar ji has mentioned. So, in fact, one of the criticisms of Canada has over the last few years has made some changes to the laws that give that pay attention to the demands of the First Nations. And one of the criticisms of that is that you have these people in Canada who are, for all practical purposes, white, who will claim that one ancestor somewhere was indigenous, and on the basis of that, they are using the privileges to gain property, to take over other people's land, and things like that. They don't have any of the culture of that indigenous community left. They are Christian and white for all practical purposes. Just going back to what Shekharji was saying is that a big chunk of indigenous people, they at least have an overlay of Christianity. They may not even speak the language anymore of their ancestors. So this movement now to re-empower them, to honor the treaties that were broken, and so forth, is it too little, too late, or how does one guide this process in a way that it's not abused, and it actually leads to consolidation and growth of the community?
So, Kalji, there are two aspects to it, and I'm glad that you brought up this point. There is a huge debate right now within communities across the globe. See, natives' purity versus natives in thought, right? These are the two things. And some of our board of directors within ICHRRF, or the advisory board within ICHRRF, they would believe that it is a ploy by the governments who have signed treaties to measure their blood percentage of original genes. And it is a ploy to invalidate the treaties by basically making that population extinct and saying that, oh, you're not 100% or 50% or 70 or 60 or 15% native, so you have no claim to the rights of your ancestors. So they look at it as a threat in terms of talking about purity. Oh, they may come back and they say, oh, you're all Christians, you're all whites, you cannot claim anything here. So you will be surprised that most of the natives in some tribes in America, they're all African American looking. And then people will say, oh, how come you are nowhere looking, you nowhere look like a Native American, you look like an African. So how are you talking about your rights as a native? So essentially, where everybody is converging right now is that if a person truly believes that he belongs, and that's where, as Ripudamanji said, United Nations has not defined who is an indigenous person and who is not an indigenous person. It is up to the person to claim what he wants and what he believes that he is. So eventually it is ideology, it is the worldview of these native tribes that they believe should be protected, because that will in effect protect Earth, which they keep at the center of their world. So in short, there are two ways to look at it. Somebody claiming that they look completely they're different, but they are corrupting, so-called, corrupting the native culture. But the other way is the native cultures are growing. So one example is Romuvas in Latvia and Lithuania. They have gotten recently recognized by their parliament, and the whole effort by they got it after multiple efforts, and I think in the second time they got recognized. But the first time, the right party, which was very aligned to the church, they rejected them to be recognized as a group because they felt that they're all Christians, they're all whites. How can you go back to 10 centuries and say that you are the people who are following that? But eventually the tide is in a way a very small tiny thing is happening in the West, where the people are going back to the native beliefs and belief system. So I will just give the overall context without answering your question, but those are the 2 points, and there are many layers to it.
Right.
That as you go with each individual aspect, you can further debate on those issues.
Right.
And
It's a
again,
question of identification.
finding the allies worldwide is very important. In case of Romuva religion, it was not the Parliament of Lithuania.
Yes.
I think it was a very, sort of persistent legal struggle involving European Congress of Religions, ethnic religions, that took the case to European Court of Human Rights. And they first won the case in European Court of Human Rights, which forced the government of Lithuania to change the stance. And yes, there was change in government also, so that the next government, took the diktats or the verdict from the European Court of Human Rights. So ultimately, it is how many allies you have, how much voice you have, how much articulate you are, that will win you the point. And in that context, I will mention, because one issue has not been discussed so far, that indigenous people do have an international organization. It's called UNPO, Unrepresented Nations and Peoples Organizations. And a number of these, sovereign nations in the West, including United States, and some of the entities that are, fighting for self-determination are members of this UNPO organization. It has been formed on the pattern of UNO, United Nations Organization. And, for any of these communities to find an ally is to join that organization, so that you have an international presence and you have people speaking in your presence. So as president of ICHRRF, my next project would be to have a partnership arrangement with UNPO, so that we can continue to work with those communities and organizations. And I think this would be a good segue to that task, apart from the fellowship, that we draw some sort of memorandum of understanding with UNPO and become either an observer or partner with that organization, so that we can assist some of these unrepresented nations and communities. Well, we do have time. If anybody has some comment or observations, we can take that.
So, sir, there are two more points. One is about the co-option and appropriation of the indigenous practices by Abrahamic faiths. So, if you go back to the history of Christmas,
Yes.
there were many people in the West who were killed for celebrating Christmas,
Yes.
and then this celebration of welcome of Sun God was basically appropriated by the Christians. And similarly, there is another point which is about secularism. Now, there are some countries in Europe where secularism means none of the religious practice is allowed, which means you will see some of the European countries banning kosher food and also halal food, right? Whereas in some parts of the world, like in India, everything religious is allowed to everyone. That is what secularism means here. So this is another aspect that needs to be covered in this dilemma that we are facing.
I think we are getting away from the topic. I will take your first point very much. Christmas was a pagan winter solstice festival, and generally it was celebrated in the name of Vedic god Mitra. And there was a tradition called Mitraism, and early Christians appropriated, digested. So if you see, and Ripudaman will know, that in Orthodox Slavic countries, Christmas is celebrated on January 6th or 7th, not on 25th. So
Right. Near to Uttarayan.
even if, so there is a, if you celebrate the birth of Christ on December 25th, and then in other countries you are celebrating on January 6th or January 7th. So that tells you, that it was, and there has been a tradition of, misappropriating and digesting that is being seen. That is actually going more away from the issue of ancient and indigenous cultures and their traditions and all. And the separation of church and state as a secular thing is supposedly there in some of the Western liberal democracies. How far that is practiced, that is to be critically appraised. But again, that becomes a totally separate topic, and it becomes, sort of, it has some political overtones. So we will not deviate from this current topic of ancient and indigenous people and their rights. Otherwise, we will be diluting the effort in this. Maybe we can have a separate seminar on those issues, which are not pertaining to this. They are topics by themselves. So we'll
Yeah.
look at that. Yes, Ripudam, you have something.
Two things, Adityanji. First of all, related to you were right. We are talking about the rights, religious rights of the indigenous people. But these, their belief system also gets diluted uh, because of the corporate cultures, like big corporates. For example, in Russia, the celebration, how the Christmas has to be celebrated was basically carved by the big corporates. Like Coca-Cola company, and that blue and red color, white and red color, and other stuff of it. So that to basically increase their market share in different regions. Slowly, it is penetrating in the territories of the people, indigenous people also. That is one point. Second point I wanted to discuss was regarding that case study that I was talking about of those people. And these people lost the case. And the special thing about their territory was there were no inhabitant in that territory. That was totally wild area. And the state created a municipal party and a minister and a mayor for that land, which, to control the land which did not have anything. They lost the case, and in the verdict they also said that the the government cannot give them guarantee to protect the objects um, uh, that they want to use to practice their beliefs. Uh, that has a lot of implications. That says, in another way, they're also telling us the people who use certain objects for their worship. For example, Hindus use idols, or some other people use other type of idols or things. If someone would come and destroy those things, destroy their place of worship or the idols that they believe in, they would not get any justice, because there is no law that protects them, their objects. So they would say, okay, you can continue believing and practicing what you believe in, but there is no case against the person who has destroyed those objects. So that is one take, and it has, what I'm trying to get is, it has very serious implications for the other similar communities.
Point well taken. I think we are coming to the end of our time. So our next seminar is supposed to be on history of human rights movement, which Ankit will present. Unfortunately, Ankit already presented it in his first seminar when he covered this topic. I was not very happy about because I had clinically separated different areas. So if there is a separate topic, it should not have been covered in that, and focus should have been on international covenants and international rights. But nevertheless, since we have that seminar, we will have to discuss and go over some of that content once again.
Similarly, there is also an overlap between today's and 2 weeks hence when we're talking about paganism in the United States. Then we can talk about some of the pagan communities both within the United States as well as Europe and how they are evolving as well. So there's an overlap there as well.
Dr. Patel, any last moment comments?
My only closing comment is that we try to focus today on religious freedom as the law defines it, and that's why that case study was taken up here.
No, that is perfectly fine. That was good, actually. That was good. But you know, these topics are such that it is very tempting to, you know, go off tangent into a different direction, and that is what I'm trying to do. That let's stay on the topic at hand. Well, if there's nothing else, then we will close this seminar. And as like with all our seminar, this has become part of our content and fellowship training. So it will be uploaded on our website and the fellowship training, this thing. And if anyone else wants to, you know, watch this or, you know, review this, this would be very, very helpful. And I think from that perspective also, it is good to stay focused and not go into areas that are not the particular, you know, focus of the seminar, because these are supposed to be academic seminars and we should stay on the academic discussion part of it. Dr. Patel, if there's nothing else, should we close the seminar?
Yes, I think we can, yes.
Okay.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah.